I never thought that this day would really come. Standing in my own apartment with the keys in my hand, I couldn't help but smile. After years of frugality and living in a cramped rented apartment, sacrificing every little bit of luxury, I finally made it. I, Brittany Anders, was the landlord. And before we continue, write in the comments from which city you are watching this video. Enjoy watching. People always told me that I was the most responsible person in the family, while my younger sister Jessica was rushing from one guy to another, living off their generosity. I worked at Thompson & Associates, saving every extra dollar I could. Our mom always said that Jessica was just finding herself, but I knew better. That's who she's always been, a golden child who couldn't make mistakes. I slowly ran my hand over the granite countertop, enjoying the smoothness of its surface. This is the kitchen, I whispered to myself. There was nothing special about her, but she was mine. Everything is mine. Mortgage payments are going to be tough, but I've calculated everything down to the last flavor of my morning coffee. I've compiled spreadsheets, thought out budget plans, and allocated expenses. That's who I am, a planner. Responsible. Boring, as Jessica likes to say. I decided to throw a little housewarming party. Nothing extravagant, just a few close friends from work and my old school buddies. I even invited my mom and Jessica, even though I knew very well that I shouldn't expect much. Mom's reaction was predictable. "Oh, honey, I'm just so busy with work this weekend, you know how it is." Jessica didn't even bother to answer. Typical. The first to arrive was Sarah from accounting and her unfailing cheerfulness. "Kim, this place is amazing," she exclaimed, handing me a bottle of wine. "You actually did it." One by one, my friends started coming. Tom and Rachel from high school brought a houseplant. Michael emerged from the office with a cheese plate, comically balancing it with one hand while taking off his jacket with the other. The apartment was filled with laughter and conversations, the kind that make a new place a home. Late in the evening, Tom raised his glass. For Kim. For her dedication and hard work, which, as you can see, is still paying off. Everyone supported his toast. I felt tears welling up in my eyes. These people, my chosen family, were here to celebrate my achievement. The absence of Mom and Jessica hurt a little, but I've long been used to it. They were always more interested in each other than in me. It was a quiet Sunday afternoon, 2 weeks after my housewarming party, when the doorbell rang. I wasn't expecting anyone. Still in my old sweatpants, with my hair carelessly gathered, I was tidying up the apartment. When I opened the door, my heart skipped a beat. Mom and Jessica were standing there, both in the very images I knew all too well. Mom, well-groomed, with perfectly styled hair, in a beige coat and with a branded bag on her elbow. Jessica was wearing dark glasses, although it was cloudy, as if she was imitating an aspiring celebrity. Mom stepped inside first, without even waiting for an invitation. "Well, aren't you going to invite us in?" Jessica followed her, lazily chewing gum. I remained standing by the door, clutching its handle. "I wasn't expecting you," I finally managed. Mom had already stepped into the kitchen, her gaze gliding over my cupboards, as if she were the mistress of this house, and not me. "Brittany, have you even started dinner? It's already 4 o'clock." I blinked, digesting this. "Mom, how could I start dinner if I didn't know you were coming?" I closed the door and followed her, trying to keep my face impenetrable, although irritation was already bubbling inside, a premonition of an upcoming conversation that I knew would not be in my favor. "You could have called first," I said, barely able to contain the reproach in my voice, but my mother just waved her hand dismissively, the same familiar gesture that always made me feel 2 inches shorter, as if I had become that girl again who brings excellent grades from school, but instead of being praised, she only hears, "Well done, but it's already expected." "You've always been hopeless with household chores," Mom continued, looking around the kitchen with a critical expression on her face. "I tried to teach you, but you were always too busy with your nose and those ledgers." Meanwhile, Jessica was already wandering around the apartment, as if assessing it from the point of view of a realtor or, rather, a potential buyer examining whether the housing meets his standards. She leisurely ran her fingers along the walls, glanced at the ceiling, checked if there was enough space in the living room, looked into the bedroom, unobtrusively lifted the corner of the bedspread, as if calculating how comfortable she would be here if she suddenly wanted to stay. At the same time, she shook her head and muttered softly to herself, and I knew all too well what that meant. She didn't like something, and soon she wouldn't miss an opportunity to tell me about it. I sighed, trying to keep my remaining patience, and in an effort to lighten the mood, I suggested, "I'll make some tea." After all, if they've already invaded my space, it's better to let them sit at the table with mugs in their hands than to walk around my apartment like inspectors. I turned to the stove and filled the kettle, listening to Jessica finally settle down at the kitchen table behind me, taking off her sunglasses and fixing me with the same look I've seen 1,000 times before, the look of a person who wants something and is still not sure how best to voice it, but for sure. He knows that the answer, no, will not suit him. "This is actually a good place, Kim," she finally said in that tone that always preceded unpleasant news, the same soft, almost friendly voice that was supposed to lull vigilance. "The location is perfect, right in the center of everything." I carefully placed 3 mugs in front of them, deciding not to rush to answer. "Thank you," I said stiffly, sitting down across from him. Meanwhile, my mother continued to methodically criticize the organization of my kitchen, opening cupboards, assessing whether the dishes were placed correctly, whether there was too little space for storing food, but I learned a long time ago not to pay attention to her comments. Ever since I was a child, I knew that in my mother's eyes, everything I do could always have been done better. Jessica ran her finger along the edge of the table, as if considering where to start, then took a deep breath and finally said, "I have some news. Brad and I broke up." She paused, watching my reaction carefully, but I just nodded, waiting for her to continue. "He wanted me to start paying the rent," she added with obvious resentment in her voice. "Can you believe that? After 6 months of living together." I bit my tongue and concentrated on pouring the tea, because I knew that anything I said would be used against me. "Anyway," she continued, pretending not to notice my silence, "I obviously had to move out of his place. And you know how expensive rent is now." She paused again, giving me an expectant look, as if checking whether the situation was tense enough. "I thought I could stay here with you for a few months." The mug in my hand froze halfway to the table. "What?" I asked, even though I heard her perfectly. "Just for a short time, 3 months at most, until I find a job and get back on my feet." I slowly put the mug down, trying to keep my voice as calm as possible, even though everything inside was tense. "I don't think that's a good idea," I said carefully. "I just moved in on my own, and I really need my own space." There was silence in the kitchen, but it didn't last long. "Brittany." Mom's voice cut through the air like a knife. "How dare you be so selfish? Your sister is going through difficult times, she has nowhere to go, no money, and you're sitting here in your fancy new apartment all by yourself and you don't want to help her." I balled my hands into fists under the table, forcing myself to breathe evenly. "Mom, Jessica can stay with you," I said firmly, not letting my voice waver. "There's a lot of space in your house." "Oh, my God, Kim," Jessica interrupted, rolling her eyes before her mom could object. "Have you seen where Mom lives? It's like a retirement village. Some old people walk their dogs and go to bed at 8 in the evening." "This is a perfectly nice neighborhood," I began, but she didn't let me finish. "Your place is the center of everything." She threw up her hands, pointing at the windows. "There are clubs, bars, shops here. This is a place where you can chat and make friends. How do you think I should rebuild my life if I get stuck in the suburbs?" "You're incredibly selfish," Mom added, shaking her head ruefully. "After all we've done for you." They joined forces against me, turning the conversation into a well-rehearsed performance, played out not for the first time. At first, Jessica complained, dramatically wiping her eyes with a napkin. Then, when that didn't work, Mom started accusing me of lacking family loyalty. They were throwing words around like in a tennis match, and I knew that no matter what position I took, I was not destined to win this argument. "Your father would be so disappointed in you," Mom finally said, pulling out her nuclear option, the last argument she always saved in case all other methods of influence proved useless. "He always taught you girls to take care of each other. What would he think if he saw how you turning your back on your own sister now?" It was a blow that broke me, tore out of me all the will to resist, because my father, despite his strictness and sometimes unyielding character, was always an example of justice, kindness, and wisdom for me, and the thought that he could be proud of me or, conversely, disappointed, always had to be I had power, and Mom, of course, knew it perfectly well, using his memory as a weapon, as a subtle but unmistakable lever of pressure. I felt the struggle slowly drain out of me like water from a bathtub, leaving behind only emptiness and fatigue, and before I could realize that I was giving up, I heard my own voice saying, "Great." This word was bitter, unpleasant to the taste, like rancid coffee, and I already regretted it in advance. But it was too late, because Jessica instantly perked up, her tears mysteriously disappeared, replaced by a jubilant smile. "Oh my God, thank you, thank you, thank you. But there are conditions," I added, trying my best to sound firm, even if everything was already crumbling inside. "You have to find a job, save up money and move out within 3 months." "I'm serious, Jessica." Of course, of course." She nodded quickly, jumping up from her seat and immediately rushing to me with a hug. "You are the best sister in the world. I'll start looking for a job tomorrow, I promise." I froze in her arms, not responding to them, just feeling a cold heaviness of realization grow inside. I had just been declared checkmate in a game that I didn't even want to play, and now, no matter what I did, I had to go through these 3 months. Mom looked at me with smug satisfaction, like a chess player who had just brought his opponent to an imminent defeat, and I, already knowing her, understood that she had not only won this round, but was absolutely sure that this was the only right decision. The next evening, Jessica showed up with 3 huge suitcases and a bunch of shopping bags, making me wonder how she even managed to pack so many things in a day, and as soon as I opened the door to let her in, she stormed inside like a hurricane, dragging her possessions with her, not even giving me time to realize which I'd just agreed to. "So, where's my room?" "What is it?" she asked cheerfully, wheeling her suitcases down the hall and looking around expectantly until she reached my bedroom door, looked inside and declared with delight in her voice, "This one is perfect. The view is simply amazing." "This is my room," I said quickly, feeling irritation building inside. "You'll stay in the guest bedroom, or you can go back to your mom." She pouted, clearly unhappy with this turn of events, but thankfully she didn't argue anymore, picking up her pride from the floor and heading into the smaller bedroom, dragging her suitcases with her, her shoulders slumped, betraying a disappointment she didn't even try to hide. That first night, when everything was already decided and the inevitable happened, I cooked dinner for both of us, simple pasta with sauce, hoping that the food would help ease the tension a little, because, after all, now we had to live under the same roof, and it was worth at least trying to establish some kind of connection. Harmony. Jessica was still messing around in her room, complaining about the lack of space in the closet and making meaningful sighs, but when I called her to the kitchen table, she nevertheless came out, clearly tired, but with the same confidence that even in this small space she would find a way to settle in. I decided that it was best to take a position right away, without postponing the inevitable, so after waiting until she settled at the table, I began to say, "Okay, if we're going to live together, we need to set some boundaries." I watched her carefully while she seemed to be carelessly twirling spaghetti on a fork, but I could tell by the slight tension in her shoulders that she was listening to me. The first rule: no loud noise. I have to get up early for work, and the walls here aren't that thick. "Great, great," she nodded hurriedly, taking a bite of pasta. "It's very tasty, by the way." I ignored her attempt to change the subject. "Secondly, we need to be careful with utilities, which means no hourly showers. I shot her a meaningful look, remembering my mom's water bills when we were teenagers, and don't forget to turn off the lights when you leave the room. I'm not 12 anymore, Kim, she protested indignantly, but I just continued, not giving her a chance to distract me. And, most importantly, I paused to emphasize the seriousness of what I said, no guests without my permission. This is my apartment, and I need to know who's coming and going. Jessica finally put down her fork and looked me straight in the eye. Her expression softened, becoming somehow strangely serious, even sincere. I understand, Kim, I really do, she said softly. I know that I wasn't always reliable in the past, but I want to prove to you that I've changed. I'm going to find a job, save money, and get out of your sight before you know it. There was such genuine conviction in her voice that I froze for a second, surprised at how truly she said it. For the first time in many years, she didn't look moody, overconfident, or using her tricks. For the first time, she looked like an adult woman aware of the consequences of her actions. And for the first time since this whole situation started, it flashed through my mind that maybe this wasn't going to be as terrible as I'd imagined. I felt a glimmer of hope. Maybe she had really grown up. Maybe this time everything would be different. Maybe it would work, and I needlessly wound myself up imagining the worst. The first week went surprisingly smoothly, and although I tried not to get my hopes up too much, deep down I wanted to believe that Jessica finally understood how the adult world works and decided to accept its rules instead of living like an eternal teenager. I left for work early in the morning, sometimes without even having time to find my sister awake, but when I returned home in the evening, I was greeted not only by the relative order in the apartment, but also by the smell of freshly prepared food. Jessica really tried, though not exquisitely, but she cooked dinner quite well, and most importantly, she kept the kitchen clean, which in itself seemed almost miraculous, given her habit of creating chaos around herself. One evening, sitting over a fairly well-cooked fried chicken, I decided to ask her how her job search was progressing, because I wanted to know if her diligence was just a temporary ploy. How was the interview today? I asked, watching her as she eagerly popped a piece of chicken into her mouth. Oh, I went to a marketing firm downtown today, she began enthusiastically. They said they'd call me back next week. I nodded, thinking that was a good sign. If she's actually been invited for an interview, it means she's at least trying. This pattern lasted for about 2 weeks. Would come home, find dinner ready, the apartment would stay in order, and Jessica would tell me stories about the various companies she had applied to. She looked passionate, and I started thinking that maybe my sister had finally grown up, that maybe I was being too hard on her, distrusting her too much. But then everything started to change. At first, I noticed that dishes were accumulating in the sink, and although it was unpleasant, I did not pay attention. We all get tired. We all have days when we are too lazy to wash the plates immediately after eating. But then the cooking stopped altogether, and I realized that this change was not an accident, but a pattern. I'd come home and find Jessica sprawled on my couch with her phone in her hands, idly scrolling through her social media feed, and the apartment looked exactly the same as it did the morning I left it, and sometimes even worse. But the most unpleasant moment was that evening when, tired after a particularly long day at work, I returned home and saw her in the same position as I had left her in the morning, with the only difference being that next to her on the coffee table were takeaway packages, food that I ordered it just for myself. I had to cook dinner myself while she kept scrolling through her phone, not even bothering to offer help. When the food was ready, she suddenly became animated, as if the smell itself had called her. Jessica, I said, trying to keep my voice level, but inside I was already seething with irritation. I thought we agreed to share the chores. She said with a shrug, not looking up from her meal. I'm just so tired of cooking and cleaning. It's so boring. I sighed heavily. How are things going with the job search? I asked, still hoping to hear something encouraging. Oh, I went for another interview today, she replied with a shrug. But they want about 5 years of experience for an entry-level position. Can you believe it? Did you apply anyway? She grinned. No, of course not, Jessica waved me off, as if I'd said something stupid. I'm not going to waste my time on companies with such ridiculous demands. After a month of our temporary housing agreement, all my hopes that Jessica would change completely evaporated. My apartment turned into a place to sleep for her endless parties, which, apparently, dragged on well into the night, because every morning I found empty bottles, half-eaten slices of pizza and someone's jackets left in the hallway in the kitchen. The sounds of her phone conversations echoed through the walls all day while I was at work, and I could tell the frequency of these calls from complaints from neighbors, who increasingly informed me that the apartment across the street was bustling with life, as if there were a nightclub. One morning, when I was getting ready for work, I accidentally overheard her talking. "Sorry, I can't talk right now," she muttered in a hoarse voice. "Yes, I had a terrible hangover." "No, my sister is still here." "Yes, I know, she was so tense that night." I froze. Last week, Jessica stumbled home at 2 in the morning, smelling of alcohol and cigarettes, and of course, I didn't sleep, because it's impossible to fall asleep when a drunk person is trampling through your apartment, bumping into furniture and loudly muttering something unintelligible to himself. And the next morning, towards noon, when I had already returned from work for my lunch break, she staggered out of her room in the same clothes she had left in yesterday, and with reddened eyes, clearly still not fully recovered from the night's adventures. "Kim," she moaned, sinking onto the couch. "I need you to go to the pharmacy. I'm dying here." It took me a moment to understand what she was talking about. "What?" "I need these hangover pills. You know, the ones with electrolytes," she continued without even opening her eyes. I looked at her, feeling a cold rage building up inside. "There's water and Advil in the kitchen," I said evenly. "You're the worst," Jessica moaned, pulling a pillow over her face, as if I were tormenting her with my refusals. A good sister would have helped. That night I finally got tired. I could no longer stand this chaos, her indifference, and her absolute inability to take responsibility for my life, and despite my inner doubts, I did what I had been avoiding all these weeks. I called my mom. "Mom, you need to talk to Jessica," I said as soon as she picked up the phone, trying to contain my emotions, but my voice was still shaking with irritation and fatigue. "She doesn't even try to find a job. She hangs out every night and then sleeps until noon. She doesn't help at all around the house, and my apartment has turned into a dormitory for her friends who come and go, as if we have a train station here." But as soon as I stopped talking, giving her the opportunity to realize the seriousness of the situation, I heard a familiar, dismissive tone, which immediately made me tighten my fingers on the phone. "Oh, Brittany," she drawled, and I already knew from that one sigh that my appeal to reason would be ignored. "You're making a big deal out of a molehill again. Jessica just needs time to figure things out, to figure out what she wants from life. She's young, she needs to have fun. You've always been so serious. At her age, you were already thinking about a career, about the future, but she was different. You never understood how to have fun." I closed my eyes, holding back my anger. Sure. The conversation was doomed from the very beginning. Meanwhile, the apartment was getting worse every day, the chaos engulfing her like an infection spreading from one room to all the others. Jessica's room turned into a real biohazard zone. Dirty plates and cups grew tall, like some kind of creepy junk structure, among which there were things that I didn't even want to identify. Clothes were scattered everywhere, in lumps and layers, mixing with bed linens, crumpled towels, and food wrappers. Empty wine bottles rolled on the floor, posing a threat to anyone who dared to enter. I tried to put things in order a few times, but it was like fighting a storm. As soon as I cleaned up, everything returned to normal a day later. I even found moldy coffee cups hidden under a pile of her clothes, perhaps forgotten, perhaps left there intentionally. One evening, when she finally got home, I decided to put an end to this mess. "Jessica," I said over the sound of her phone. "This has to stop." She looked up irritably, clearly not thrilled that I had distracted her from another endless scrolling of the social media feed. "What else? You're not looking for a job, you're not helping around the house, Your room has turned into a dump." I tried to control myself, but my voice still betrayed how tired I was of all this. "We agreed that this was temporary, but now it seems that you just decided to settle here on my terms and do whatever you want." I expected resistance, but Jessica's reaction turned out to be even worse than I thought. She abruptly stood up, glared, exhaled irritably and, without saying a word, turned around and went into her room, slamming the door so that the walls shook. A second later, I heard her immediately start typing furiously on her phone. 20 minutes later, my own phone rang, and before I could even say hello, my mother's shrill, indignant voice came on the line. "Brittany," she practically shouted, "how dare you harass your sister?" I blinked in shock, feeling my annoyance give way to complete bewilderment. "Mom, you don't understand." "No, you don't understand," she interrupted, seething with indignation. "Jessica's doing her best, and all you're doing is criticizing her. I raised you better than that." And with that, she hung up. The 2 months dragged on in the same spirit: chaos, irritation, conversations that led to nothing. My utility bills almost doubled. Jessica took a shower twice a day, sometimes for an hour, left the lights on in every room, and turned the air conditioner on full blast even when she wasn't home. I spent a fortune on groceries, which she consumed with indifference, not even bothering to heat the food for me. Meanwhile, her social life was flourishing. She kept coming in and out, always dressed like she was going to a club, always with different people. She freely used everything she found in the apartment. She took my food, my wine, my toiletries, as if they belonged to her by right. Work, as before, remained something completely non-existent for her. And then it was that Thursday. I was sleeping deeply, exhausted from a long day at work, when I was woken up by the sound of jangling keys and drunken giggling. I propped myself up on my elbow, casting a sleepy glance at the clock on the bedside table, 3:27 a.m. Another late-night guest of Jessica's, and if this was a normal case, I would just roll over and decide not to get involved. But something was different. I put on my robe and went out into the hallway, and what I saw made me freeze. Jessica stood at the door, barely able to stand. Her makeup was smudged, her eyes glittered in the semi-darkness, but that wasn't even the most unpleasant thing. There was an unknown guy standing next to her, tall, with a grin that immediately made my stomach clench. He was wearing a leather jacket despite the summer heat, and his arm was wrapped tightly around Jessica's waist, holding her close as if she belonged to him. "Oh, hey, Kim," she drawled, the words merging into one unintelligible mass. "This is Rick. Isn't he hot?" I didn't have time to say anything, because Rick didn't even bother to hide his indifference to me. He cast a brief, dismissive glance, and then bent over Jessica again, nuzzling her neck. And they started kissing. Right there in my hallway, completely ignoring my presence. "Jessica," I said sharply, resisting the urge to look away. "What's he doing here?" They broke away from each other, and Jessica, still leaning on Rick, lazily turned her head to me. Her eyes, lined with smeared mascara, sparkled with the same reckless gaiety with which drunk teenagers shout outright nonsense to each other, considering them witty. She grinned like she was about to share the most exciting news, some incredible revelation that was going to turn my world upside down. "Rick is going to stay with us," she announced happily, swaying slightly, and it seemed to me that I had misheard, because there was not even a shadow of doubt in her voice. There was no question, there was no attempt to negotiate, just a statement that it had already been decided and my opinion meant nothing here. In my room. His roommate kicked him out, can you believe it? The shock hit me like an icy wave, cutting through my fatigue and irritation like a sharp blade, making my blood run cold. I couldn't believe she was seriously suggesting this, that she was so blind, so selfish, so indifferent to how her decisions and actions affected others. "Absolutely not," I said, barely keeping my voice steady, even though everything was boiling inside. "Don't be such a bore," Rick drawled, speaking for the first time, and his tone alone was enough for me to feel the dislike, deep and instantaneous. His voice dripped with arrogance, mocking contempt for anyone who dared to contradict his wishes, for anyone who, in his opinion, did not deserve respect. Your sister said it wouldn't be a problem. He turned back to Jessica as if I no longer existed, and their lips met again in a kiss. His hands began to wander over her body with such greed that I wanted to grab a bottle of bleach and pour it into my eyes, just not to see this sight. Stop it, I said sharply, and when they didn't react, I repeated it louder, breaking into a growl. Rick, you need to leave. Now. Jessica pulled away from him. Her eyes narrowed, a shadow of a malicious grin flashed on her lips, and then she folded her arms over her chest, tilting her head in a defiant gesture. No way, she said with defiant bravado. He's not staying here. I could feel the rage building, gripping my muscles in a steely grip. This is my apartment. My voice sounded cold and firm, despite my efforts to remain calm, but Jessica didn't even seem to hear it. You can't just move in here with any random guy without my permission. You're such a bitch. She screamed, her face flushed with anger. You've always been jealous of my relationship, that's all. The last thread of my patience snapped. Get out, I said, almost in a whisper, but there was a deadly, icy determination in that whisper that made even Rick freeze. Both of you. Right now. You can't kick me out. Jessica stumbled over her own words, her confidence cracked, her voice faltered. No, you can't, I retorted, and before she could find a counterargument, I went to her room, tore off the closet doors and pulled out the suitcases, putting them on the floor with a thud. You were supposed to be here temporarily. You should have been looking for a job. You should have at least tried. I looked at her with fatigue, with disappointment, with that cold realization that comes when you finally realize that someone you loved will never change. Jessica froze, her eyes darting around the room, and suddenly she started moving furiously, opening drawers, snatching clothes and things out of them, stuffing them into suitcases with such randomness that I was afraid for the integrity of the zippers. Rick was standing in the doorway, lazily leaning against the jamb, watching this performance with a smug expression on his face, as if everything that was happening was entertaining him. In 15 minutes, she stuffed everything she could into her 3 suitcases and slammed them shut with such force that I involuntarily expected one of them to burst at the seams. Good. She spat out, clutching at the handles, her knuckles white with tension. Stay in your stupid apartment. She was dragging her suitcases to the door, panting with anger, and as she was leaving, she turned to me with an expression full of pure hatred. You're a terrible sister. Stop it, she screamed, her voice ringing with emotion. You've always been terrible. I hate you. She stormed out of the apartment, Rick following her, and at the last moment, before the door slammed shut, she threw me another parting gift, a stream of choice expletives embedded in each word with such fury that my photographs on the walls shook from the impact. And then there was silence. A sudden, suffocating, dense silence that covered me like a heavy blanket. I stared at the door, my hands still shaking from the strain. Exactly 58 minutes later, my phone rang. Mom's name appeared on the screen. How dare you kick your sister out in the middle of the night? Her voice exploded into the receiver without any introduction. She could have been hurt. She could be in danger. I listened to her in silence, clutching the phone, and then, without saying a word, pressed the end call button. After a moment, she turned off her phone completely. The silence in my apartment after Jessica left was almost deafening. I spent the first few days cleaning up, getting rid of the chaos she left behind, the traces of destruction that needed urgent attention. I found moldy dishes under her bed, wine stains on the carpet, mysterious sticky stains on every surface. The garbage bags I filled could fill a small landfill. Better safe than sorry, I muttered as the locksmith I'd called changed the locks. He didn't ask a single question, just nodded understandingly, installing a new bolt. The weight of the new keys in my hand felt like freedom. My birthday was approaching, and for the first time in many years, I decided to celebrate it at home, in my newly cleaned apartment, which now, after Jessica's departure, was filled with a completely different air, the air of calm, order and freedom, so long awaited and, as it turned out, so fragile. I didn't want this day to be overshadowed by memories of quarrels, disappointments, or the guilt that my mother so skillfully tried to stab into me like a rusty dagger, leaving stinging, unhealed wounds in my soul. I just wanted to spend the evening surrounded by those who were really dear to me, those who demanded nothing but sincerity from me, and therefore, when making the guest list, I deliberately avoided names that could overshadow this day. I did not invite either Jessica, my mother, or any of them. Those who felt it their duty to remind me how monstrous I had become by choosing my own life. Among the guests were my closest friends from work, the few school buddies with whom I maintained warm relations, and several cousins from my father's side, who, unlike my mother's family, understood the complexity of the situation and did not try to make me feel like a monster for finally setting boundaries. I hoped that this evening would bring me at least one day without drama, at least a few hours without heavy conversations, without accusations, without an endless sense of duty to those who have never appreciated my efforts. The party started wonderfully. Sarah from accounting brought her famous chocolate cake, rich, moist, smelling of cocoa and something familiar, cozy. Tom and Rachel, my old friends, arrived with a bottle of my favorite wine, cold, tart, perfect for leisurely conversations. My cousin Em, cheerful and wise at the same time, she gave me a beautiful houseplant in honor of my liberation of space, as she put it with a knowing smile, and I felt a little warmer from the realization that in the midst of all this confusion I have people who see, understand, and support me. We all gathered in the living room, laughing, sharing stories, enjoying the lightness that I missed so much, and for a moment it seemed to me that this evening would really be what I dreamed of, free from the past. But then the doorbell rang, harsh, demanding, too aggressive for a casual guest or a belated courier, and my heart sank, because I recognized that sound, recognized this way of pressing the button until it echoed jerkily throughout the entrance, like a demand for attention, like a warning of an impending storm. I knew what I would see when I opened the door, but I still held my breath for a moment before turning the handle. And, of course, Mom was standing there. She burst into my apartment like a thundercloud, swift, heavy, full of electricity that was about to discharge on me, and her gaze swept across the room, not looking for me, but for an audience, looking for a stage on which she could act out her unchanging tragedy, an offended, suffering mother whose ungrateful the child turned away from his family. "Not so happy birthday," she said with a venomous grin, and then, without even pausing, as if she didn't need to breathe, she took over the center of the room, turned to my friends and cousins, and began her performance. "I can't believe you're all here celebrating with her." Her voice rang with resentment and indignation, but not for me, for the audience. "You're celebrating with someone who threw her sister out in the middle of the night." The room froze. The faces of friends and relatives reflected a mixture of shock and awkwardness. Someone awkwardly cleared his throat, someone looked away, not knowing how to react, and I saw how the atmosphere of comfort and warmth cracked like thin ice under too heavy a load. "Mom," I said softly, hoping to reason with her, hoping that maybe this time she would hear. "Now is not the time." "And when?" She turned to me, her eyes blazing with indignation. "When do you think it's time to discuss how cruel and heartless you've become?" Your poor sister was devastated. I took a deep breath, trying to hold on, trying not to let my emotions get the better of me, but my voice was shaking with pent-up anger and pain as I answered. "Jessica was terrible. She took advantage of my kindness and—" "You're selfish." My mother interrupted me, her voice rising to an almost shrill note. "That's who you are. You've grown into a selfish, heartless woman. Is that what you wanted? Living alone in your fancy apartment while your sister is struggling?" Something broke in me. Maybe if you spent less time babysitting Jessica and more time actually raising her, she wouldn't be struggling. I didn't even realize I'd said it out loud until the room was completely still, until the air was thick and tense, until my mother's face was contorted with rage, and then her palm clanged against my cheek. The crunch of the impact reverberated through the room, and the silence after it was deafening. The force of the slap made me recoil. I clutched my face in shock, feeling my skin burn, not believing that she really did it, that in front of all these people she allowed herself to stoop to this. Ungrateful. She spat out with such venom that it became difficult for me to breathe. You're not my daughter. Then she turned around, stormed out, and closed the door behind her with a deafening bang. I stood there in a daze, my cheek burning, tears coming to my eyes, despite all my attempts to hold them back, and it was only when Emma cautiously approached me and silently hugged me that I finally broke down. The other guests also came up. Someone touched me on the shoulder. Someone just stood next to me, not knowing what to say, but I felt their support, their quiet, unobtrusive, but so necessary support. But the damage was done. The atmosphere of the party was shattered, replaced by a heavy cloud of awkwardness and anxiety. My perfect drama-free birthday was destroyed in less than 5 minutes. 2 weeks later, my cousin Emma called me. I just thought you should know. Her voice was careful. Jessica and her boyfriend moved into your mom's house. I changed the subject. I didn't want to know any more. 4 months have passed. 4 long months filled with work, self-discovery, and, finally, silence. I threw myself into my work, filling my days with tasks, meetings, and deadlines, and for the first time in a long time, my mind was focused on something that brought me pleasure, rather than endlessly analyzing family dramas and trying to figure out where I had made a mistake. I renovated my apartment, investing not only money in it, but also a piece of my new life, making the space cozy, free from chaos and other people's things, and every corner now breathed only me, only my decisions and my taste. I started going to yoga classes. At first it seemed something alien, strange, but gradually slow, stretching movements, concentrated breathing, and a feeling of complete control over my body began to bring me peace, which I had not even imagined possible before. The parts of me that were once distorted were healing, without drama, without nighttime breakdowns, without passive-aggressive family dynamics, without the usual accusations, without the weight of other people's expectations. Just quiet mornings with hot coffee slowly steaming in the cool air of the kitchen. Just peaceful evenings with books that I could immerse myself in without fear that at any moment the door would open and a new storm would break out behind it. I got used to this new rhythm of life, to its regularity, to the fact that now there is no place in it for those who brought only pain and disappointment. And then one day my phone lit up with a familiar number. Mom's number. I stared at the screen, and my fingers hovered over the call reset button. My heart slowed down, as if deciding whether to let chaos return to the place where order had been built for so long. I barely answered. But something in me, maybe stubborn curiosity, maybe an old, deep-rooted hope for the impossible, made me pick up the phone. Brittany, her mother's voice was different. Not overbearing, not accusing, not filled with eternal pretensions and dramatic sighs. He was quieter. Broken. Tired. Please don't hang up. I need you to listen. I didn't say anything, just waited. You were right, she continued, and I heard her voice crack. About everything. Jessica, she's out of control. I didn't answer, but inwardly I already knew what this was leading to. She and this Rick. Mom continued, her voice filled with something like bitterness, despair. They've taken over my house. They don't work, they don't help with anything, they just create mess after mess. I heard in her tone the weariness, the exhaustion, the very helplessness that she never showed me when I was a child, but now it seems she couldn't hide it. They have these parties, her voice was barely audible, at my house. In my quiet neighborhood. She took a deep breath before continuing. And when I tried to stop them last week. Jessica, she pushed me. I gripped the phone tighter, feeling something like malicious irony rise in my chest. Brittany, she actually pushed me. Mom was already holding back tears. I need your help. You are welcome. I don't know what to do anymore. I sat in silence, holding the phone to my ear, feeling the ghost of her slap on my cheek. remembering her words at my birthday party. Ungrateful trash. You are not my daughter. I closed my eyes and exhaled. You have to deal with this yourself, Mom, I said softly, surprised at how steady my voice was. Your golden daughter is your problem now. I hung up the phone. Then I blocked her number. But the news still reached me through the Vine family chart. Emma called regularly with the news, and her voice was always careful, as if she didn't know if I wanted to hear it or not. Mom filed an eviction lawsuit against Jessica and Rick. Every day, screams could be heard in her house, which the whole neighborhood could hear. The police came one night after concerned neighbors called because of the noise. Apparently, Jessica and Rick threw a party that got out of control, Emma said during one of our calls. And someone thought they heard a fight. You're not worried about them? What is it? She asked cautiously. I thought for a moment, but answered honestly. No. Pause. Mom made her choice a long time ago. She always chose Jessica over me. I always justified her behavior, always made me a bad person who wouldn't let her. Here is the result. I do not know how the eviction case ended. I do not know if Jessica and Rick have left or if they are still terrorizing Mom's quiet neighborhood. I do not know if Mom has finally learned the lesson that indulging in bad behavior only leads to chaos, or if she is still justifying her precious youngest daughter. But I know one thing. My apartment is quiet now. My bills are payable again. My dishes stay clean. My lights are off, and no one is helping themselves to the food or wine I bought for myself. I sleep all night. I'm no longer woken up by drunken giggles, slamming doors, or other people's dramas. And that's the only thing that matters now.